As offenses continue to struggle and leave us all completely bewildered on how we cannot move the ball at all, it gets more and more important to find these small edges in DFS. That is why Jake Tribbey and myself, Thomas Tipple, show up here every single week delivering the goods. This is DFS Early Look. Let's dive into week 4.
What? What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
I'm Thomas Tipple. That's Jake Tribbey. This is the DFS Early Look, the earliest look into the upcoming DFS Week 4 slate that you can get in the business. This last week was upsetting. It was a gut punch. It started out looking like we were actually going to get a barrage of offense. Instead, well, we were all left in the dust. Unless you had a few key plays. That's what Jake and I are here to bring you. You can read Jake Tribbey's full article over at FantasyPoints.com. As we always do on this program, Jake, we want to start at quarterback, and I just have to say, how absolutely terrible is Bryce Young? Because we have Andy Dalton in this article this week, and he has just made the Panthers offense go in one game.
Yeah, absolutely. And the coaches seem to believe in him far more than they did Bryce Young. Carolina's neutral situation pass rate jumped from 62% with Bryce Young under center to 74% with Dalton under center in week 3. Now, for perspective, a 74% neutral situation pass rate would lead all teams since at least 2021 if extrapolated out to a full season. That resulted in 27.6 DraftKings points for Dalton, which was the 7th highest fantasy score by any quarterback this season. Now, maybe Carolina won't lead the decade in pass rate, but Dave Canales obviously has faith in Andy Dalton's ability to chuck the football. As the Tampa Bay offensive coordinator last season, Canales led Baker Mayfield to 17.4 DraftKings fantasy points per game, and that would rank 8th best among main slate eligible quarterbacks in week 4. So Dalton, who is the quarterback 22 by DraftKings pricing, is far too cheap on this slate. Even in a tougher matchup with Cincinnati, we know the pass volume will be there and the fantasy production should follow.
And there are going to be a lot of fun options for you to pair with Dalton, even though Thielen now being a little banged up, he's going to miss a couple weeks, but that just makes someone we're going to talk about a little bit later even that much more appealing. That's called a teaser. Stick around for that. Let's talk about running backs. Again, I hammer this home every single week. This is the most important position, in my opinion, on your slate, and it can be the hardest one to get right because you never know when somebody's going to score their first ever career touchdown for the Green Bay Packers on a screen pass from Malik Willis. This position is completely unhinged, but we do have an anchor here in Alvin Kamara. Let's talk about him.
Yeah, we absolutely do. Running back production has been pretty strong so far this season, and Kamara is really just leading the way. His 89% snap share led all running backs in week 3, and he posted his highest overall snap share since week 4 of 2021. Now, that'd be great news for any normal running back, but it's far better news for a player like Kamara. On a per-snap basis, Kamara was the 6th most efficient running back in the NFL last year, and he's been 71% more efficient this season, easily pacing the position in per-snap efficiency. That's a long-winded way of saying that snaps matter more for Kamara than just about any other fantasy running back, and maybe his outlier week 3 snap share was driven by the absence of Taysom Hill. Or maybe Kamara's coaches have realized they should give the league's 2nd most efficient running back by fantasy points over expectation as much work as he can handle. This past offseason, Ryan Heath noted that while hyper-efficiency almost always regresses, it is a proven precursor to an increase in volume, and we may be looking at that exact increase with Kamara. Now, I wouldn't consider his week 4 matchup with Atlanta a favorable one for opposing running backs. They've actually been the 3rd toughest by fantasy points per game allowed. But if Kamara is a 90% snap share player, he should be at least 900 more expensive this week.
Right, and we have now multiple games of a great offense and only one true stinker where Kamara was still the fantasy asset that you wanted to own for the most part. Let's talk about old reliable in an outstanding matchup. Against Washington, James Conner might be able to look like he's dialed the clock back 5 years. Let's talk about him.
Yeah, so, if you've listened to any Fantasy Points content this year, last year, we've talked at length about how awful Washington's pass defense is, but their run defense really isn't much better through 2 games. Monday Night Football is not included here because we're recording before the Monday Night Football games. Washington has allowed the 4th most yards before contact, the 5th highest explosive run rate, and I think this is by far the most important stat I could cite here, the most yards per carry on man or gap rushing concepts. Now, nearly 74% of James Conner's rush attempts this season have come on man or gap concepts, which makes the Commanders a sneaky great matchup for him. And he's notoriously game script sensitive, averaging 32% more fantasy points per game in wins compared to losses since the start of last season. Arizona's a 4.5-point favorite this week, and Conner should get fed here as long as they can translate that favorable spread into positive game script.
Right. If you're watching this in the future, the Monday night games have already happened, and Washington is so bad. Chase Brown scored a touchdown. That should tell you everything you need to know. Please let that happen for no selfish reason at all. Let's talk wide receivers, because one of these guys got the bag and has so far taken it home and ran because the production hasn't been there. You think differently this week. Let's talk Brandon Aiyuk.
Yeah, so Juwan Jennings stole the show on Sunday, but Aiyuk still finished week 3 with the 9th most expected fantasy points of any pass catcher. Now, obviously, we want that expectation to turn into reality. We can't feed our families with expected fantasy points, but a week 4 matchup with New England certainly helps here. The Patriots have allowed the 5th most passing yards per game, and they've played the 5th most man coverage in the NFL this season. Over the last 2 years, Aiyuk sees a 21% increase to his targets per route run and a 28% increase to his fantasy points per route run against man coverage relative to zone. This is an elite schematic matchup for Aiyuk, who is far too cheap with nearly every 49er banged up.
Right. We want to attack these matchups. This offense is just gold. You just have to pick the right one, and we think we have. Look, meat's back on the menu. And the main course here is Diontae Johnson in your DraftKings lineup because, oh my goodness, let's talk about it.
Yeah, with Carolina throwing the ball a ton, Diontae Johnson is looking like a fantastic play this week, and I would expect him to be one of the most popular players of the slate. All it took was a quarterback change for him to return to his rightful place as the king of expected fantasy points. He finished week 3 with the 2nd most expected fantasy points, the 6th most actual fantasy points, and the 3rd highest target share of any pass catcher. Now, that's awesome volume, and it makes Diontae Johnson's wide receiver 28 DraftKings price tag look like a complete joke. There's no reason to think this volume will slow after Carolina led the week in neutral situation pass rate. And we know Johnson is the best receiver on this team. He led all wide receivers in separation win rate last year, and he ranked 2nd in separation score. The bottom line for week 4 is that he's finally getting competent QB play, a notable uptick in overall offensive pass volume, and he's still one of the best separators in the NFL. He's going to be one of the most popular wide receivers of the week 4 main slate. I could see ownership here pushing 40%.
What an unreal catch he made in the end zone as well. I just am so happy that we might have old Pittsburgh Steelers and Ben Roethlisberger led Diontae Johnson back for our slates. We've needed this. Speaking of feeding our families, kind of an out of nowhere play, but a little bit out of necessity. This is Fantasy's tight end 1 out of nowhere. Let's talk Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, the tight end position has been a complete disaster this year, but we have a pretty great opening right now for Dallas Goedert to see massive volume. 58% of the Eagles' 2023 targets will be unaccounted for this week if Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown both miss week 4. Goedert managed a 36% first read target share and 15.9 expected fantasy points, with Devonta Smith still on the field for 73% of routes in week 3. Now, those marks ranked 1st and 3rd best among tight ends last week, and with so little receiving talent left on the roster, Goedert's usage has nowhere to go but up. Tampa Bay hasn't shown much of a weakness to tight ends, but Goedert could easily lead the position in target share this week. And again, the position has been a complete disaster. We generally want to take the few layups we can get, and Goedert is one of them. He's a strong play, but I'd expect heavy ownership to follow if the Eagles end up without their top 2 receiving options this week.
Let's keep in mind, we're not saying that you're chasing an exact repeat from last week. That is not really possible. What this is, though, is a potential edge while other people are maybe paying up for a potential bounce back like we've been doing with most tight ends most of the year. If you're watching this video and you haven't read Jake Tribbey's full article over at FantasyPoints.com, hit like, hit subscribe, turn YouTube off, and go get some reading done. Because if you want an edge, FantasyPoints.com is the best place to get it. For myself, for Jake Tribbey, this is DFS Early Look. We'll see you guys at the top of the leaderboards.